Let's move on to Paul's repeated references in Galatians 2 to quote, those who were of repute, who he eventually identifies as James, Cephas, and John. While it is true that all the apostles could still sin, and God shows no partiality in this respect, Paul makes what seem to modern ears like very backhanded or dismissive remarks about them, saying, quote, what they were makes no difference to me, and that they, quote, added nothing to me. Despite this, it seems to me that Paul is at least still like a hostile witness, apparently begrudgingly admitting that Peter, James, and John were of repute within the church. If all this is true, it doesn't seem like a very good look for Paul. It's worth pointing out that Paul refers to Peter by his Jesus-given name and title, Cephas, which means rock in Aramaic. Again, implicitly acknowledging the authority given to him by Jesus in Matthew 16. I'm also not the first to notice that Paul seems very agitated and temperamental in his letter to the Galatians. Now, some of that may be justified by his zeal for the true faith, apart from the Jewish works of the law, but some of it also seems over the top. Like when he says he wishes the Judaizers or circumcision party would go all the way and mutilate or castrate themselves in chapter 5, verse 12. Moreover, as we'll see later, those of repute, the pillars of the church, did not correct or add anything to Paul's doctrine, but they did add something to Paul after he laid his gospel before them. And we might even have a chance to see some additional exaggeration, perhaps, on Paul's part with respect to Peter compelling the Gentiles. Why did the New Testament church consider Peter, James, and John to be of repute and pillars of the church? Well, Jesus made Peter, John, and John's brother James to be his inner circle, as we see in three events recorded by the gospel writers, namely the raising of Jairus' daughter, the transfiguration, and the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane. In each of these events, Jesus privileges Peter, James, and John as witnesses to his power over death, the manifestation of his full divine glory, and to his full humanity in the face of approaching suffering. Already here, we can see that Jesus was not opposed to hierarchy, even among the 12. And there are, of course, passages where Jesus privileges Peter over the 3 and over the 12. Now, it is important to point out that, though Ambrosiaster and Augustine identify the James mentioned by Paul in Galatians 2:9 to be the same James who we see in these 3 gospel events, Jerome and many, if not most scholars today, consider Paul to be referring to the brother or cousin of the Lord, not the son of Zebedee and the brother of John. Regardless, when Paul refers to Peter, James, and John as being thought of as, quote, of repute or, quote, pillars, this is not coming out of nowhere or some mistake on the part of the church at the time. Paul testifies to the real rank and authority that these 3 had over the entire church. Chrysostom is apparently the church father with the earliest surviving commentary on Paul's reference to those of repute. And he clearly recognizes how what Paul says could be interpreted as casting doubt upon the status and authority of Peter, James, and John. But he denies that this is what Paul is doing. Rather the opposite. He says these expressions of Paul do not impugn the reality of the greatness of the other apostles, but actually imply Paul's assent to the common opinion of the church. He says Paul was not accusing or shaming or blaming the apostles in any way. It is not clear to me that we should take Chrysostom's word for it on this one, especially considering the theory he has for what really happened, which we'll discuss later. Zealous to protect the reputations of both Peter and Paul, Jerome shared the same opinion as Chrysostom on this point. He said, Paul is not insulting, accusing, or speaking against the apostles, but only saying that God shows no partiality or favoritism, which Peter also said in welcoming Cornelius into the church. But we will see later on what Jerome thought was really going on, at least at one point in his life. Like Chrysostom and Jerome, in his commentary on Psalm 75, Augustine also sees no insult or indifference in Paul's words, but rather an affirmation of the reputation, role, and authority of the apostles, including Peter.